The Atlantic stretches endlessly, a vast expanse of dark, rolling water under the pale light of the morning sun. You can hear the gentle hum of the destroyer Calder's engines, steady and constant, cutting through the waves with quiet purpose. Above, the sky shifts softly from deep blue to silver, reflected in the subtle movement of the ocean. Out here, every ripple, every shadow, every faint glimmer on the horizon carries meaning. The sea is patient, immense, and full of secrets, and the men aboard the Calder move with careful precision, attuned to its rhythm. Engines vibrate softly beneath their feet. The hull creaks gently, and the sonar pings faintly, echoing into the depths below. Tonight, you will sail with them. You will feel the sway of the ship, the whisper of the waves, the quiet tension of the hunt. You will drift with the Atlantic, caught between calm and anticipation, motion and stillness. Close your eyes, breathe in the salt-tinged air, and let the rhythm of the sea carry you into the story of life aboard a British destroyer hunting U-boats during the vast, endless days of the Second World War. The sea was a restless thing, vast, cold, and alive with whispers that only sailors could truly hear. The destroyer HMS Calder cut through it with steady determination, her bow rising and falling against the Atlantic swell. To the men aboard, she was more than steel. She was home, prison, and shield all at once. Beneath her decks, the engines hummed with that familiar, throaty vibration that became part of a man's heartbeat after enough days at sea. Above, the horizon stretched endless, a smear of gray sky meeting darker gray water, stitched together by wind and salt. Petty Officer William Hargreaves leaned against the cold railing, his gloved hands numbed despite the thick wool. The North Atlantic in winter wasn't kind to anyone, least of all to those who hunted shadows beneath the waves. Somewhere out there, in that vast emptiness, German U-boats lurked, silent, patient, deadly. The destroyer's job was to find them before they struck the convoys bound for Britain, before they could send another ship and another 100 souls to the ocean floor. It was a grim task, but one that filled every man aboard with a kind of quiet pride. The sea had its rhythm, and the men aboard learned to live by it. The constant thrum of the engines, the whistle of the wind through rigging, the steady slap of waves against the hull. It all became a lullaby of endurance. Between watches, the crew would huddle in the mess, steam rising from tin mugs of tea that never quite managed to stay hot. They spoke little, for the sea took conversation from them. It replaced it with glances, nods, and the shared understanding of those who lived with danger so close. It became ordinary. The captain, a quiet man named Thornton, paced the bridge, with hands clasped behind his back. His eyes were fixed on the sonar station, where a young operator listened intently to the soft pings echoing through his headphones. Each sound that came back from the deep was a story, some of empty sea, some of shifting currents, and sometimes something darker. When that sound came, the faint, distinct pulse of a submarine, every man aboard felt it like a change in air pressure. The routine would vanish, replaced by an electric stillness that made the ocean itself seem to hold its breath. But tonight was calm. The convoy trailed safely behind them, a line of blacked-out ships moving silently through the dusk. Above, the sky was low and heavy with mist, hiding the stars. Hargreaves took a deep breath, tasting salt and oil on the air, and listened to the distant heartbeat of the engines. The ocean stretched endlessly around him, dark and indifferent, yet somehow comforting. It was strange, he thought, how even amid fear and cold and the endless gray, a man could find peace in the rhythm of the sea, a kind of quiet that lived somewhere beyond words. Morning came slowly, as it always did in the North Atlantic, not with sunlight, but with a faint lifting of the gloom. The horizon remained a smear of steel gray, indistinguishable from the sea. The destroyer rolled gently, her hull creaking as if she, too, was weary of the cold. William Hargreaves rubbed the stiffness from his hands and made his way toward the galley. The smell of burnt toast and weak tea filled the narrow corridor, carried by the constant vibration of the ship's engines. It wasn't comfort, not really, but it was familiarity, and that counted for something. The men spoke little over breakfast. They had all learned to save their words, as if speaking too freely might invite the sea to listen. A few traded quiet jokes, the kind that only made sense to those who'd spent months hunting phantoms beneath endless waves. Someone mentioned the sonar picking up a strange echo during the night, faint, rhythmic, and gone as quickly as it came. No one lingered on it, but the thought hung in the air like mist. Out here, a sound could mean anything: shifting currents, whale song, or the steel belly of a U-boat rising from the deep. On the bridge, Captain Thornton studied the charts spread before him. The convoy held formation behind them, merchant ships heavy with supplies for Britain, moving at a careful crawl through hostile waters. Every ship depended on the destroyers, like Calder, to guard them, to listen for the unseen enemy. Thornton's face was expressionless, but inside he felt the weight of that responsibility pressing down. Each dot on his radar wasn't just metal and cargo. It was hundreds of lives trusting him not to falter. He had seen too many ships vanish before. Sudden eruptions of flame, followed by silence and debris scattered on a black water. Below decks, the sonar room was dimly lit, the air thick with oil and sweat. A young operator named Price sat hunched over the equipment, headphones clamped tight, eyes flicking to the glowing dial in front of him. The rhythmic ping ping echoed softly, steady, and hypnotic. Most of the time, it was nothing, but every now and then, the sound that returned from the deep had a different tone, a hollow note that didn't belong to open water. When that happened, Price's heartbeat would quicken, and the entire ship seemed to lean forward, listening with him. At 0947 hours, it came again, faint, metallic, deliberate. Price straightened, frowning slightly, and adjusted the dial. The echo returned, clearer this time. It wasn't current. It wasn't whales. It was something solid. He turned to the officer on duty, voice low but certain. Contact bearing 270. Possible sub. Within seconds, the quiet calm of the ship shifted. Orders murmured down the line. The engine's hum deepened as the destroyer turned toward the sound. The sea outside didn't change. Still gray, still endless, but every man aboard felt the air tighten. Hargreaves hurried to his post, the same dull fear gnawing in his stomach. It wasn't terror, exactly, but the familiar awareness that death could be waiting somewhere unseen beneath them. The ocean had 1,000 ways to end a man's story, and a torpedo was among the swiftest. He checked the depth charges, their cold metal shells slick with condensation, and waited for the next order. Around him, the crew moved like a machine. No shouting, no panic, only that deep, wordless discipline. born of repetition and necessity. Then came the order: stand by to attack. The destroyer began her slow, circling run over the coordinates, sonar echoing like a heartbeat in the deep. Somewhere below, perhaps, a German crew was listening too, hearing the same pings, feeling the same fear. The sea between them was thin as breath. The destroyer moved in wide, deliberate arcs across the gray expanse, her hull slicing through the cold Atlantic like a blade through mist. The wind had risen, carrying with it a fine spray that clung to every surface. Men wiped salt from their faces, blinking against the sting. Somewhere below them, perhaps just a few hundred feet down, a German U-boat might be gliding silently through the black water, trying to slip away unseen. That thought made every movement feel slower, heavier. Each clank of metal, each footstep seemed to echo too loudly in the quiet. On the bridge, Captain Thornton stood with his binoculars lowered, his gaze fixed on the rolling sea. He couldn't see the enemy, but he didn't need to. Years of experience had taught him to trust the instruments and the instincts of his men. Behind him, the sonar pings continued their steady rhythm. The pulse of the hunt, the sound returned with a faint metallic timbre, distant but distinct. The operator called out again, his voice measured but tight. Bearing steady. Range closing. Thornton nodded once, then gave the order. Depth charges ready. Below, on the stern deck, Hargreaves and his crew sprang into motion. The racks were loaded, cylindrical steel drums, heavy and silent. Each one held a promise and a fear, a thunder meant to crush steel and air beneath tons of water. Hargreaves checked the firing pins, his breath visible in the cold. Around him, no one spoke. They didn't need to. The men had performed this drill countless times, though it never stopped feeling final. You could never be sure who would walk away after the sea swallowed the sound. The ship turned broadside to the wind, engines deepening to a growl. The order came down through the intercom, quiet but clear. Fire one. A moment later, the first charge rolled from the rack and vanished into the sea. For a heartbeat, there was only the hiss of the spray. Then the ocean erupted. A deep, muffled thud rose through the hull, followed by a tremor that ran the length of the ship. It wasn't a sound so much as a feeling, a heavy, underwater concussion that made every man's ribs hum. One after another, more charges dropped, each followed by another booming echo from below. The destroyer's deck vibrated with the rhythm of the detonations, as if the sea itself was exhaling in fury. The men braced themselves against the railings, watching the plumes of water leap skyward before collapsing back into the churning surface. The air smelled of salt, fuel, and something faintly metallic, the scent of battle, if such a thing could exist without fire. Then, silence again. Only the wind remained, curling around the ship like a ghost. The sonar resumed its pinging, slower now, as if listening to the sea's reply. Every man waited for debris, for oil, for any sign that the enemy below had been caught. But the ocean said nothing. It never did. Hargreaves exhaled, realizing he'd been holding his breath. Around him, shoulders relaxed, though only slightly. The tension never left entirely. It only sank deeper, buried beneath habit and necessity. Somewhere in the back of his mind, he wondered what it was like on the other side, down there in the cold dark, in the silent steel tube, waiting for the next blast. War was strange that way, he thought, both sides staring into the same abyss. hoping the other blinked first. The destroyer steadied her course again, the captain giving no sign of satisfaction or doubt. Out here, certainty was a luxury no one could afford. They would move on, keep listening, keep waiting. The Atlantic rolled beneath them, vast, indifferent, eternal. And above it all, the faint echo of the last explosion drifted away, swallowed by the wind and the waves. The destroyer slowed to a cautious drift, her engines easing down to a low hum. The sea, once torn open by thunder, was settling again into its patient rhythm. Fragments of foam drifted across the gray surface, mingling with small patches of darker water. The men leaned over the rails, squinting into the mist for signs of wreckage, the telltale shimmer of oil that meant their quarry had been caught. It was a ritual they all knew. Search the waves, hold your breath, wait for proof that something had ended down there in the deep. Hargreaves wiped the spray from his face and scanned the waterline. A faint rainbow sheen began to spread across the swell, subtle at first, then unmistakable. Oil, someone murmured, almost reverently. The word moved through the crew like a ghost. Men who had been silent since dawn now lifted their heads, eyes narrowing toward the spreading stain. For a moment, it seemed to confirm everything. The ping, the drop, the explosion, all leading to this quiet aftermath. But none of them cheered. You didn't celebrate at sea. You noted, you logged, and you carried on. The captain watched from the bridge, binocular steady, expression unreadable. He knew what the oil might mean, and what it might not. U-boats had tricks enough to fool the best of them. Some carried tanks of oil to release as decoys, convincing their hunters that the kill was done. Others would dive deep, play dead, and wait for the destroyer to move on before striking again. The ocean was a theater of patience, and deception was its first law. Down below, the sonar hummed quietly, its echoes returning nothing now but the empty sound of open water. The young operator removed his headphones, rubbing at the ache behind his ears. Hours of listening to that mechanical heartbeat could make a man half crazy. Sometimes he imagined he could hear things in the static, whispering voices, distant machinery, even music that wasn't there. The ocean played tricks on all of them. It could turn silence into a sound, and loneliness into something you could almost feel breathing beside you. Hargreaves leaned against the railing, watching the slick drift slowly astern. The smell of oil reached them, sharp, chemical, unnatural. It mingled with the salt and the diesel from their own engines, forming the strange perfume of war at sea. He thought about the men below the surface, whoever they were. Maybe they were gone now, their submarine broken apart, the cold rushing in faster than breath. Or maybe they were still alive, drifting deeper, engines quiet, waiting for the British ship to turn away. He couldn't decide which thought was worse. A bell rang softly, and the captain's voice came over the loudspeaker, calm and measured. Maintain course. Resume patrol. There was no talk of victory, no ceremony. The destroyer turned slowly, finding her heading once more into the wind. The convoy still needed watching, and the Atlantic, as always, gave no answers. As the afternoon wore on, the clouds began to thin, and a pale light broke through, glinting off the endless water. The oil slick stretched out like a long bruise behind them, fading into the distance. Hargreaves watched it until it disappeared, then looked out at the horizon, the same gray line, the same restless sea. Somewhere beyond it, home existed, Warm beds, laughter, light, but out here, it was all rhythm and water and waiting. The destroyer pressed on, her engines steady, her crew silent. Beneath her, the Atlantic rolled, deep, unknowable, and full of ghosts. Night fell quietly over the Atlantic, as it always did, not in color, but in temperature and sound. The horizon dissolved, and the world became a single shade of darkness, stretching in every direction. The only lights were the faint, hooded glow of instruments on the bridge and the red lamps below decks that painted the corridors in a dull, eerie warmth. The destroyer kept her speed low, engines murmuring, prow cutting through the black water like a whisper. Out here, the night belonged to sound. The constant thrum of machinery, the sighing wind, and the rhythmic pulse of sonar echoing softly through the hull. William Hargreaves stood his watch on deck, collar turned high against the cold. The stars were hidden behind clouds, but he could sense them, faint and unreachable, somewhere beyond the fog. He'd lost count of how many nights he'd stood like this, watching nothing, listening to everything. The sea and sky had become so familiar that they felt like old company. Each wave breaking against the hull sounded like a word half spoken, and every gust of wind seemed to carry a secret it never quite revealed. Time aboard ship didn't move in hours, but in rotations, watches, meals, and brief snatches of sleep that blurred together into something that only resembled a day. The men below shuffled in their hammocks, their breathing blending with the groan of metal and the occasional rattle of loose gear. No one ever truly slept deeply. The ocean never allowed that. Even in dreams, they could feel the ship's motion, the vibration of the engines, the distant heartbeat of the sonar. At 2 in the morning, the fog began to roll in, thick, white, and alive. It swallowed the world until the sea and sky were gone, replaced by a damp silence that felt almost sacred. Visibility dropped to nothing. The men on watch could barely see the bow from the bridge. Every sound seemed louder now. The creak of steel, the faint hiss of the waves, the soft tapping of rigging against metal. Even breathing seemed like too much noise. The captain ordered reduced speed, and the destroyer slowed, ghost-like, her wake vanishing into the fog. Hargreaves found himself listening harder than ever, as though his ears could see what his eyes could not. Somewhere behind them, the convoy followed, invisible shapes moving in formation, bound together by trust and radio waves. Somewhere beyond that, perhaps, another ship followed, or stalked. The thought came and went like a shiver. He'd long since learned that fear at sea wasn't a sharp thing. It was slow, quiet, and patient, like the ocean itself. In the galley, a kettle hissed softly, and someone poured tea into dented tin mugs. The men drank in silence, grateful for the warmth more than the taste. One of them began to hum a tune, low, tuneless, something from before the war. The sound drifted through the corridor, mingling with the hum of the ship until it became part of it. Up on deck, Hargreaves watched the fog thicken. The air smelled of oil and iron and the faint sweetness of salt. He leaned on the cold railing and looked into the nothingness ahead. Somewhere out there, dawn was waiting. Another gray morning, another round of pings, another cup of lukewarm tea. But for now, it was only the fog and the hum of the engines and the quiet patience of men who had learned to live between one heartbeat and the next. The fog began to lift just before dawn, thinning like breath on glass. The first light of morning seeped through the gray, painting the sea in shades of dull silver. For a few moments, the world seemed suspended between night and day, soft, still, and strangely peaceful. The destroyer, Calder, moved through the calm water at half speed, her wake spreading in delicate ripples behind her. Around her, the convoy slowly came back into view, faint outlines of merchant ships emerging from the mist like ghosts returning from the deep. Hargreaves stood at the rail, his eyes red from sleeplessness. He had long since stopped feeling tired in any ordinary way. Fatigue had become a companion, something that simply existed beside him, like the cold, like the sea. He sipped at a mug of tea that had gone cold and watched as the pale sky brightened. The sunrise wasn't beautiful in any traditional sense. It was thin, watery, without color. But after endless nights of fog and black water, even that muted light felt like grace. From the bridge, the captain scanned the horizon through his binoculars. The convoy looked intact. No new gaps in formation, no plumes of smoke, at least not yet. It was a small victory, the kind that only existed for a few hours at a time. He made a note in the logbook, the pen scratching quietly against the damp paper. Beside him, the helmsman hummed under his breath, a tune so soft it barely rose above the hum of the engines. The men had their rituals, little anchors of sanity in a sea that never stopped moving. Below decks, the galley came to life again. Bacon hissed faintly on a hot plate, tea boiled, and the air filled with the comforting smells of breakfast. It wasn't much. Powdered eggs, tinned meat, the same bread baked days ago. But it meant warmth, and warmth was its own kind of luxury. Laughter drifted through the narrow corridor, quiet but genuine. Even in war, even on a ship chasing ghosts beneath the waves, there were moments when men remembered how to feel human. As the light grew stronger, the sea began to glitter. The waves were small now, rolling gently beneath the destroyer's hull. Somewhere far off, a gull called, a rare sound this deep into the Atlantic. It circled once, then vanished into the pale sky. The sonar operator, back at his post, listened to the returning pings. Steady, empty, reassuring. No echoes of metal today. Only the soft voice of the deep, whispering that the enemy was elsewhere. For now. Hargreaves leaned against the rail and closed his eyes for a moment. The wind brushed his face, carrying the salt and the faint scent of fuel. The ship felt almost peaceful, as if she too was breathing easier in the morning light. Around him, the men moved slowly, each absorbed in his task. It was strange, he thought, how quickly danger could become ordinary. How a man could live with fear so long it stopped feeling sharp. Out here, everything softened, the edges of thought, the shape of time, even the memory of home. He opened his eyes again. The horizon stretched endlessly ahead, pale blue above, silver below, and nothing in between but the hum of the engines and the promise of another day. The war felt far away in moments like this, as if it belonged to another world entirely. But he knew better. The calm never lasted. The ocean, like the enemy, always returned. By mid-morning, the calm had begun to shift again. The fog that had lifted with dawn now rolled back across the horizon like a slow-moving curtain. Within an hour, the convoy was half swallowed once more, their silhouettes fading into pale shadows on the water. The destroyer Calder held her course, though the men aboard had learned to distrust the quiet. Calm seas and low clouds were the favorite companions of U-boats. The ocean could hide anything when it chose to. On the bridge, Captain Thornton stood over the wireless operator as a faint signal came through, the sharp clicks and whines of Morse code cutting through the steady hum of the ship. The operator scribbled quickly, his pencil tapping in rhythm with the machine. When the message ended, he tore the slip from the pad and handed it to the captain. Thornton read it once, his brow tightening just slightly. The signal was from one of the merchant ships on the outer edge of the convoy, SS Millerton, reporting a suspected periscope sighting off the starboard beam. It could be anything. It could be nothing. But at sea, nothing had a way of becoming something without warning. Thornton gave the order to alter course. The engines deepened, and the destroyer swung toward the reported position, her bow cutting through the mist. The men below felt the shift immediately. The sound of the engines changed pitch. The deck tilted ever so slightly, and the air seemed to tighten. No alarm was sounded. There was no need. They all knew what it meant. Every change of course carried the same silent question. Was it them? Hargreaves checked the depth charge racks again, making sure the safeties were clear. The metal felt colder than usual beneath his hands. Around him, the deck crew worked in the same quiet rhythm they always did. Slow, precise, unspoken coordination. In war, noise was wasteful. Every man aboard had learned that calmness was its own kind of courage. Below, in the sonar room, the operator adjusted the dial, listening for the faintest sign of movement. The pings went out in their measured rhythm, disappearing into the depths before returning, clean, empty, meaningless. Then, after several long minutes, something faint came back, a soft echo, strange and uncertain. The operator frowned and adjusted again. There it was, a pulse that didn't sound like current or rock. It was faint, irregular, as though something down there was shifting slowly, trying not to be found. He relayed it up to the bridge. The captain didn't hesitate. Maintain bearing. Slow to 8 knots. Keep pinging. The destroyer's engines eased back, the vibration softening to a low murmur. Above decks, the fog thickened until even the water, a few yards from the hull, seemed to vanish. The ocean had swallowed them whole. Hargreaves stood at his post, feeling the change in the air. The crew around him grew still. Every man was listening now, not to the ocean, but to the silence between its sounds. The destroyer drifted like a ghost, sonar echoing into the deep. Somewhere far below, if the signal was true, another set of ears might be listening too. German sailors holding their breath, waiting for the next ping, the next decision, the next burst of thunder. Minutes stretched, elastic and uncertain. The sonar pings came and went, steady as a heartbeat. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the faint contact was gone. No echo, no trace, just open sea again. The captain said nothing. He looked out into the fog, as if expecting an answer that never came. The ocean remained silent, vast and patient. Somewhere, unseen, it might have been smiling. For hours, the destroyer Calder circled the patch of ocean where the signal had vanished. The fog clung to her hull like damp cloth, the horizon gone entirely. It was as if the ship were floating in nothing, a single moving shape in an endless white void. The sonar kept pulsing its slow, deliberate heartbeat, and each man aboard waited for it to stumble, to find again that elusive echo from the deep. But the sea offered only silence. Hargreaves stood near the stern, eyes fixed on the water. He could see nothing beneath its surface, only the gentle roll of the gray waves. It was strange, he thought, how much faith men placed in sound out here. A faint noise in a pair of headphones could send 100 men into action, ready to kill or be killed, all because of a noise that might have been anything at all. He wondered, sometimes, if the ocean enjoyed the game. Below decks, the sonar operator kept listening, fatigue beginning to fog his mind. The pings were steady, identical, and after hours of hearing them, the silence between each one grew heavier, more oppressive. He could feel the shape of his own heartbeat against the rhythm of the machine. Every creak of the hull, every gurgle of water against steel began to sound like something else. The echo of a propeller, the scrape of a periscope, the whisper of another ship moving in the dark. It was impossible to tell what was real after long enough. The sea blurred everything. Captain Thornton leaned over the plotting table, tracing lines on the chart with his pencil. His movements were calm, deliberate, almost meditative. Around him, the bridge crew stood quiet, eyes flicking between the instruments and the endless white beyond the windows. The captain had been at sea long enough to know that patience could kill faster than panic. When the sea refused to speak, you listened harder. At last, near midday, the sonar gave a faint return, soft, hesitant, almost shy. The operator's eyes widened slightly as he leaned forward, adjusting the gain. It was there, then gone again, like a breath beneath the surface. He reported it, voice level, but taut. Possible contact, bearing 235, faint and moving. Thornton straightened, eyes narrowing. Helm, bring us about, steady as she goes. The destroyer began to turn, her engines rumbling low, the bow cutting a slow, deliberate arc through the fog. Hargreaves felt the change immediately, that subtle tightening in the air, the almost electric sense of waiting. Every man on deck became stiller, movements smaller. The ocean was so calm now that each splash of water against the hull sounded too loud. They all listened for something they couldn't possibly hear. Minutes passed, then more. The pings continued, steady as breathing. Then the sound was gone again. No echo, no pulse, just the deep, indifferent quiet. The operator tapped the controls, adjusted, listened again. Nothing. The signal had evaporated, like mist. The captain stood for a long moment in silence, then gave the order, resume original course. His voice was calm, but behind it there was something heavier. Not frustration, but understanding. The sea gave what it wanted and took back the rest. You couldn't force truth from water. You could only keep looking. As the destroyer moved on, the fog thinned once more, revealing the faint shapes of the convoy ahead. Still safe, still steady. Hargreaves exhaled, realizing how tense his shoulders had become. It had been nothing, perhaps, or something that slipped away before it could be named. Out here, the difference hardly mattered. The sea would whisper again, sooner or later. It always did. Evening crept over the Atlantic like a soft blue blanket. The fog had lifted, revealing a calm horizon, the waves turning to molten silver under the setting sun. The Calder glided on through the quiet, her engines humming at a low, contented rhythm. For the first time in days, there was no alarm, no sudden order shouted down the corridor, only the smell of salt, diesel, and the faint sweetness of pipe smoke drifting through the cool air. Down in the mess, the men sat around the long, scratched tables, tin mugs in hand, waiting for the postmaster to open the small canvas bag that had come aboard during their last resupply. It wasn't much, a few envelopes and creased parcels, but to the crew it might as well have been treasure. Mail days were holy things, proof that the world still existed somewhere beyond the endless blue. Seaman Davies was the first to get a letter. He held it as though it were made of glass, eyes tracing the familiar handwriting on the front. His wife wrote in loops and curls, every word packed tightly, as if she were trying to fit an entire conversation into a few inches of paper. He didn't open it right away. He just looked at it for a while, smiling quietly to himself, before finally tearing it open and reading, lips moving silently. Around him, others did the same, each man lost in his own small world. Hargreaves received one too, folded sheet from his sister in Kent, who wrote mostly about her garden. She said the roses had survived the frost, and the cat had taken to sleeping in the coal bin. There was something deeply comforting about the ordinariness of it. No talk of the war, no mention of danger or fear, just flowers, cats, and the stubborn persistence of normal life. It reminded him that the world they were fighting for wasn't made of flags or slogans. It was made of quiet, simple things like that. The cook, a big man from Manchester named O'Reilly, got a parcel, a tin of biscuits, and a small bottle of whiskey wrapped carefully in newspaper. He opened it with reverence, poured a few drops into everyone's mug, and raised his hand. To home, he said simply. The toast was soft, almost whispered, but in the stillness it carried. To home, they all echoed. Later that night, when most had gone to their bunks, Hargreaves sat alone on deck, his letter folded neatly in his pocket. The stars were out again, bright and endless, scattered like frost across the sky. The sea was calm, so still it reflected them perfectly. He thought about his sister, about her garden and the life she tended while he floated thousands of miles away. It struck him how fragile the line was between their worlds. A few inches of paper, a few lines of ink, that was all that connected them. He looked toward the horizon, the convoy's faint lights flickering in the distance, and felt an unexpected peace settle over him. Out here, surrounded by the vastness of the ocean, those tiny lights were everything, proof that they weren't alone, that the war, for all its chaos, was still filled with people trying in their own ways to hold on to something human. The wind shifted, cool and steady, carrying with it the scent of salt and iron. The Calder moved on through the dark, her crew asleep, their dreams stitched together by the words of people they loved. Somewhere deep below, the sea kept its secrets, but up here, for once, the night felt kind. It began quietly, as all storms do, a subtle change in the rhythm of the waves, the wind turning restless, tugging at the ship's flags with impatient fingers. The dawn sky, once a pale wash of pink, deepened to a bruised gray. The men on watch could smell it before they saw it, that metallic scent of rain and electricity, the promise of chaos. Out here, a storm didn't need an introduction. The sea simply decided. By the time the sun broke the horizon, the first waves were already rolling in. They weren't large at first, just slow, heavy swells that lifted the destroyer like a toy and set her down again. But within minutes, the wind sharpened, slicing across the deck, carrying spray that stung the eyes and lips. The ocean changed color, shifting from dull silver to deep iron blue, its surface breaking into ridges that hissed and foamed. The Calder groaned as she climbed the rising seas. Captain Thornton stood on the bridge, coat flapping wildly, his hands gripping the railing as the ship tilted and lurched. He had seen dozens of storms, but each one carried its own temperament, its own voice. This one felt personal, unpredictable, erratic, alive. He gave the order to secure the deck, his voice calm, steady, cutting clean through the howling wind. Below, the men worked quickly, strapping down equipment, checking the watertight doors, shouting over the noise. Every crash of the waves against the hull felt like a blow from something enormous and unseen. The destroyer was built for speed, not comfort. Every movement, every shudder echoed through the steel, like the pulse of a great beast fighting to stay upright. Hargreaves made his way along the deck, rain whipping across his face, coat soaked through. He had to move hand over hand, gripping the rail as the ship pitched. The sea rose beside him like a living wall, black and immense, before collapsing in a white roar that swallowed everything. And yet, beneath the chaos, there was a strange beauty in it. The raw, indifferent majesty of the ocean asserting itself. For a brief moment, he felt small in a way that was almost comforting. Inside, the mess deck had become a world of motion. Cups rolled across tables, water dripped from the ceiling, and the air was thick with the smell of oil and metal. The men braced themselves where they could, speaking little, their faces lit by the flicker of the emergency lamps. The noise was constant, the thunder of the sea outside, the groan of the hull, the rattle of loose chains. It was as if the ship itself were breathing, struggling, alive. Hours passed in this rhythm. Rise, fall, crash, silence. By noon, the storm reached its peak. Waves taller than houses pounded the bow, sending spray over the bridge like rain. But the Calder held her course, defiant and steady, slicing through each wall of water with stubborn grace. The men, soaked and exhausted, began to move more easily now, their bodies attuned to the motion. It was strange how quickly chaos could become familiar. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the wind softened, the sky lightened from black to pewter, then to the pale silver of morning after a sleepless night. The sea still rolled, but slower now, as if spent from the fury. The storm had passed, leaving the air clear and sharp. Hargreaves stepped back onto deck, breathing in the clean scent of rain-washed salt. The sun began to pierce the clouds in thin, golden lines. All around him, the ocean glittered, wild, endless, and alive. The storm had taken its due, but they had endured. And as the Calder pressed on toward the horizon, it felt, for just a moment, as though the ship herself exhaled, tired but triumphant. Night settled over the Atlantic like a dark velvet sheet, softening the edges of the horizon until the sea and sky became one endless shadow. The storm had passed hours ago, leaving the ocean restless but calm, rolling in gentle, deliberate waves. The destroyer Calder cut steadily through the water, her engines vibrating in low, contented hums, a lullaby for those still awake. Above deck, the air smelled of wet steel, salt, and the faint warmth of sun-washed wood cooling after the storm. Hargreaves leaned on the railing, coat collar turned high against the chill. Stars had begun to pierce the darkness, faint points of cold fire scattered across the sky. The Milky Way stretched like a pale ribbon, reflected in the rolling black water. He felt small, suspended between infinity and steel, yet oddly comforted by it. The storm had passed, and with it, the immediate threat of chaos. Now, there was only motion, rhythm, and the steady hum of the ship beneath him. Below decks, the men moved quietly through their night routines. Some wrote letters home, their hands trembling from exhaustion and cold. Others huddled in corners, closing their eyes against the gentle pitch of the ship. Even the youngest, the fresh recruits, had learned to find sleep in fragments, a nod, a moment, a breath between rolling waves. Every sound of the destroyer had become part of their heartbeat. The engine's hum, the creak of steel, the whisper of water along the hull. It was impossible to separate them from the rhythm of the ship. On the bridge, Captain Thornton moved slowly, checking instruments with the precision of habit. The sonar operator sat beside him, headphones draped loosely, eyes half closed but attentive. For long moments, nothing happened. Then a faint ping returned, a rhythmless echo from deep below, indistinct and almost playful in its uncertainty. Thornton listened without flinching. Sometimes, he thought, the ocean liked to remind them that it was alive, that it was watching, and that no amount of vigilance could ever claim it entirely. Hargreaves imagined the ocean as a giant, slow moving being, breathing beneath the ship. Waves rose and fell like its chest. Spray hissed from unseen crests like soft sighs, and the pings of the sonar became the pulse of its heart. He closed his eyes, letting the gentle motion of the ship lull him. The night felt endless, yet contained, protective almost, like the world had shrunk to the span of the destroyer and the men who moved quietly within it. Occasionally, a call would break the silence, the low voice of a sailor reporting a shift in the convoy SAS position, or the faint metallic clang of a hatch. These interruptions were brief and familiar, adding rhythm rather than chaos. Out here, noise was not an annoyance, but a marker of life, proof that the ship was alive, and that they were alive with it. Hargreaves finally sat on the edge of the deck, coat wrapped tight, eyes tracing the faint horizon where sea met sky. Somewhere far away, lights twinkled on another ship, faint beacons in the dark. The destroyer pressed on through the calm waters, carrying her crew through night and tide alike. He felt, in the silence, a slow connection to everything around him: the ship, the stars, the endless ocean, and a quiet reassurance that they would face whatever came next, together, until dawn returned once more. The night stretched on, deep and unbroken, the ocean a black mirror reflecting only faint starlight. The destroyer, Calder, moved steadily, her engines a quiet thrum beneath the calm. Men shifted quietly in their bunks, some awake, some dozing, all tuned to the rhythm of the ship and the waves. The air smelled faintly of salt, wet metal, and lingering rain, carrying the memory of the storm that had passed hours ago. Silence ruled, but only the kind of silence that waits for sound. In the sonar room, the young operator leaned forward, headphones clamped tight, eyes tracing the glow of the oscillograph. His mind was sharp, though fatigue nibbled at the edges. He listened to the rhythmic ping, ping that marked the heartbeat of the ship. But tonight, there was something different. A faint, irregular echo appeared, distant and fleeting, almost lost in the constant pulse. His heart quickened ever so slightly. He adjusted the gain, leaned closer, and listened again. Contact, he murmured softly, almost to himself. Not a scream or a shout, just a quiet word that carried a weight far heavier than noise. The ping repeated, a subtle echo that seemed to drift through the hull rather than return sharply. It wasn't too much, only a whisper of motion beneath the waves, but enough to stir the calm into something like anticipation. Captain Thornton appeared beside the operator, his boots silent against the metal floor. He glanced at the display, noting the faint line that pulsed across it like a slow heartbeat. No one spoke aloud, and yet the room felt full of attention, taut and careful. The destroyer itself seemed to respond, her engines humming a little deeper, bow rising slightly, as if to tilt closer to the source of the sound. Hargreaves, on the deck above, sensed the shift before he understood it. Something had changed in the air, the way the wind tugged at his coat, the subtle motion of the ship, the hush that fell over the few men still awake. He moved toward his post, hands resting lightly on the rail, eyes scanning the gray-black expanse that stretched endlessly before them. The ocean was still calm on the surface, deceptive in its silence, but he knew better. It had secrets, as always. Orders came down quietly. Prepare depth charges. Maintain station. Keep pinging. The crew moved smoothly, silently, each man fulfilling his task with practiced care. There was no panic, no rush, only the calm, deliberate precision of those who had spent weeks learning to listen to the deep. Hargreaves checked the racks, felt the cold steel of the charges beneath his hands, and waited. The echo returned again, clearer now, closer, not sharp enough to strike immediately, not yet, but enough to remind everyone on deck that the sea was alive, moving with intention beneath the waves. Somewhere below, something shifted, and the sound carried to them faintly, like a message in a language only the ocean knew. For long minutes, nothing else happened. The destroyer held her course, engines humming in low, constant rhythm. The stars overhead glimmered faintly, reflected in black water that hid whatever moved beneath. Hargreaves closed his eyes for a heartbeat, letting the gentle roll of the ship steady him. The sea had given them a signal, and now they waited, patient, quiet, alive in its rhythm. The Calder moved with deliberate patience, her engines a soft hum beneath the endless black water. The night air was heavy with the scent of salt and lingering rain, the remnants of the storm that had passed hours ago. On deck, Hargreaves felt the subtle shift in the ship's motion, the way the bow rose slightly before settling into the trough of the waves. The ocean, calm yet restless, seemed to be holding its breath, as though aware of the game unfolding above it. Below, in the sonar room, the operator leaned close to the headphones, eyes narrowing at the faint pulse that flickered across the screen. The contact was still there, elusive and irregular, moving slowly beneath the surface. Each ping returned a whisper, a murmur that teased the crew with a presence they could not yet see. The echo was faint, almost polite in its manner, but it carried weight. It said, without words, "I am here. I am watching." Captain Thornton watched quietly from the bridge, hand resting lightly on the railing. He made no sudden movements, spoke no harsh words. The hunt required patience more than speed. One false action could send the enemy slipping away, unseen and unheard, like a shadow underwater. Around him, the bridge crew moved with careful precision, eyes shifting between instruments, radar, and the gentle, deceptive swell of the waves. On deck, Hargreaves checked the depth charge racks again, the metal cold and familiar beneath his hands. The crew was taut, ready, their movements smooth and rehearsed. There was no panic, only an awareness of the moment's importance. Out here, the Atlantic demanded respect, The men had learned that the ocean never gave up its secrets willingly, and neither could they afford to. The sonar ping returned again, slightly closer this time, a subtle rhythm beneath the hum of the ship. The operator adjusted the gain, leaned in, and whispered the reading up to the bridge. Thornton nodded once and gave the quiet order: maintain bearing, keep depth charges ready, but hold position. The destroyer shifted gently, engines humming a steady, reassuring tone. The hunt was a dance, slow and exact, a negotiation between patience and opportunity. Minutes passed with nothing more than the soft creak of the hull and the whisper of waves against the steel. Then the echo moved again, faster now, deliberate, a heartbeat racing beneath the ship. Thornton's eyes followed the readings carefully, calculating, predicting, trusting the subtle cues of the sonar and the rhythm of the ocean. Every man aboard felt the subtle tension, like a string pulled taut across the deck. Hargreaves closed his eyes briefly, breathing in the night air, letting the motion of the ship steady him. The destroyer was a living thing under him, engines and hull vibrating in concert with the sea. Above, the stars were faint but clear, scattered points of light that reflected in the rolling black water. It was a strange calm, this mix of tension and rhythm, and it had a hypnotic quality that drew the men into a quiet focus. The contact remained just beyond immediate reach, unseen yet unmistakable. The ocean seemed to guard it jealously, letting them glimpse only its shadow. Hargreaves felt the familiar mixture of anticipation and fatigue. They were hunters tonight, yet at every moment reminded that the sea had its own will. The destroyer pressed forward, sonar pinging, engines humming, waves rolling endlessly. The hunt had tightened, the chase begun in earnest, and out here, in the rhythm of motion and patience, they waited for the next whisper from the deep. Far below the gray surface, the U-boat drifted like a shadow in the deep. The water around it was thick and cold, carrying no sound beyond the muffled creak of metal and the soft hum of engines. Inside, the crew moved with slow precision, aware that every motion above could be watched, listened to, and judged. The Atlantic was a living, breathing opponent, and they were its careful guests, navigating a world without light but full of subtle cues. In the control room, the captain listened to the sonar-like pulse that came faintly through the hull, not from the British destroyer itself, but from the vibrations in the water, subtle and persistent. Every creak, every wave that struck the steel hull told a story. He knew they were being hunted. He could feel it in the rhythm of the sea and the distant heartbeat of engines above. Yet he remained calm, motion deliberate, commands clipped but gentle. Panic was the enemy beneath the waves. The young helmsman adjusted the submarine's heading slightly, eyes scanning instruments dimly lit by red lamps. Outside, the pressure of the water pressed against the hull with quiet insistence, reminding them of their fragile place in this vast, silent world. A single mistake could betray them to the surface hunters, but even now, the crew moved like a well-rehearsed dance, practiced and precise. The tension was palpable, yet silent, a constant companion in the dark. In the torpedo room, a crewman checked the instruments for the 100th time, listening for the faintest vibration in the steel, the smallest deviation in depth. The Atlantic carried sound in strange ways, faster, slower, deceptive, and every echo mattered. Outside, the waves churned and glinted faintly from above. Unaware of the lives navigating silently beneath them. The surface might seem calm, but the water below told a different story, full of movement, of hiding, of waiting. The captain exhaled slowly, feeling the U-boat settle deeper into the water. The destroyer above had made its presence known, a subtle, patient threat that pulsed through the deep. But for now, they were hidden. The ocean wrapped them in its cold embrace, shielding and isolating every shadow, a layer of protection. It was a strange comfort, this silence, this slow, creeping awareness of being alive and unseen. Hours passed in this rhythm. The crew adjusted the ballast, fine-tuned the engines, and moved in near silent coordination. Each man was aware of every breath, every step, every soft vibration beneath the hull. Outside, the ocean remained indifferent, waves rolling endlessly above, the surface light dimming as the day moved toward night. They were ghosts in the water, moving through a world that was both home and danger, each heartbeat measured, deliberate. Hargreaves, miles above, could not see them, but the destroyer's sonar, faint and searching, was aware of their shadow, and that echo connected two distant crews in a silent conversation, a dance of patience, of strategy, of living in the same space without touching it. Beneath the waves, the U-boat waited. Above the waves, the Calder waited, and between them, the Atlantic held its breath. The sun dipped low, painting the horizon in muted shades of amber and steel. Twilight settled over the Atlantic, softening the waves into gentle shadows that rolled and whispered beneath the hull of the Calder. The destroyer moved steadily, engines low and constant, slicing through the darkening water with deliberate purpose. Out here, time had no urgency. Each moment stretched long and measured, and every sound carried more weight than it might on land. Hargreaves stood at the railing, coat collar turned high against the chill, eyes scanning the subtle motion of the waves. There was a strange stillness to this part of the day, a quiet pause where the ocean seemed to exhale. But the men aboard the destroyer knew better. Calm was never permanent, never complete. Somewhere in the depths, the U-boat might shift, reposition, vanish, or strike. The quiet carried a tension sharper than noise, a waiting that tightened the chest without ever raising a voice. On the bridge, Captain Thornton moved with his usual measured pace, binoculars raised to catch any ripple or hint of disturbance. The sonar operator sat with headphones tight, listening to the steady pulse of their own pings and the faint echoes that returned from below. Every blip, every irregular beat of sound drew a careful glance, a whispered calculation. The ocean had patience, and the hunter needed even more. Below decks, the crew adjusted for the approaching night. Lights were dimmed, equipment secured, movements deliberate. Every creak of the hull, every subtle shiver of metal against steel, seemed amplified in the cool, calm twilight. The mess was quiet, the men resting, cleaning, or simply staring into the dim glow, feeling the ocean's pulse beneath them. Even the smallest sounds, the drip of water, the soft clang of a hatch, became part of the rhythm of anticipation. Hargreaves checked the depth charge racks once more, metal cold and reassuring beneath his hands. He listened to the soft wind slicing across the deck, the gentle rocking of the ship, the distant hum of the convoy's engines. Somewhere beyond sight, the ocean held secrets they could not touch. But the hunt demanded readiness, patience, and the quiet understanding that any movement, any sound, could be significant. As the twilight deepened, The sea took on a glassy texture, waves blending into shadows, reflections of the fading sky catching the faintest hint of light. The destroyer moved through this living canvas like a careful brushstroke, silent and purposeful. The horizon held no signs of threat, but the ocean's stillness was deceptive. Every shadow could conceal, every ripple might betray, and every heartbeat aboard became part of the quiet vigil. Minutes passed in this careful tension. Hargreaves breathed in the sharp scent of salt and steel, letting the motion of the ship steady him. The men moved, almost imperceptibly, aware that the night would soon bring its own challenges. The sun disappeared fully, leaving only the faint glow of fading light and the soft hum of engines as the destroyer pressed on, patient, alert, and calm. By the time stars began to prick the sky, the ocean was an endless expanse of darkness, subtle waves rolling quietly beneath the hull. The Calder had not yet found her quarry, but the hunt was far from over. Above and below, the Atlantic kept its secrets, and the destroyer and her crew waited, poised, aware, alive in the rhythm of the sea and the slow passage of time. The night had settled fully over the Atlantic, deep and endless, the waves rolling like dark ribbons beneath the steady hum of the Calder. The stars shone faintly, scattered points of light reflected in the black water, and the moon cast a thin silver line along the crest of the swell. The destroyer moved with gentle persistence, engines low, slicing quietly through the ocean's soft undulations. It was a night made for patience, where every movement, every sound carried subtle meaning. Hargreaves leaned against the railing, coat drawn tight, eyes scanning the distant horizon. Out here, even the smallest change could signify something important: a shadow, a flicker, a glint of light, and then, almost imperceptibly at first, a faint glow appeared far off, on the edge of vision, barely distinguishable from the shimmer of waves. It was just a glimmer, yet it drew his attention completely. Something, perhaps a light from another ship, or a reflection caught on the surface, flickered persistently in the darkness. The captain was on the bridge, binoculars in hand, eyes narrowing as he traced the faint point of light. He said nothing aloud. Observation required calm, not comment. Around him, the bridge crew moved quietly, adjusting instruments and charts, each aware of the significance of even a single glimmer in the vast expanse of the ocean. The light was distant, ambiguous, but it hinted at presence, at life beyond the destroyer itself. Below decks, the crew felt the shift as well. Even asleep, the rhythm of the ship carried anticipation. Hargreaves could sense it in the subtle movements of the men still on watch. Careful adjustments of stance, hands brushing over railings, eyes catching the dim glow in the distance. The Atlantic had a way of sharpening senses, making small signs loom large, and this faint glimmer was no exception. The sonar operator leaned closer to the headphones, listening intently, comparing the faint echo of movement beneath the waves with the visual clue at the horizon. The two hints, sound and light, told a story incomplete yet compelling. The destroyer had found something, perhaps a convoy ship lost in the darkness, perhaps another vessel entirely. Each passing minute revealed more detail in the rhythm of the ocean, the pulse of the sea carrying information to those who knew how to listen. Hargreaves adjusted his binoculars, tracing the light's subtle dance against the waves. It shifted, disappeared behind a swell, then returned. He felt the familiar mixture of relief and tension, a promise that they were not entirely alone in the vast expanse, yet a reminder that even distant signs could hide danger. The Atlantic was generous in glimpses, stingy in certainty. The Calder altered course subtly, engines humming a quiet, steady note, aligning with the faint glow. No alarms were sounded, no haste was taken. The hunt, the observation, required patience more than action. The destroyer moved with deliberate grace, a solitary presence, navigating the endless sea, alert yet calm, poised between potential danger and fleeting hope. The glimmer persisted, a silent signal on the horizon, and the crew of the Calder watched, waited, and adjusted. Above, the stars continued to shine faintly. Below, the waves whispered against the hull, and in that quiet balance between motion and stillness, anticipation and calm, the destroyer sailed on, guided by light, rhythm, and the endless ocean surrounding them. The evening had softened into a gentle darkness, the sky a deep indigo, stretching endlessly above the rolling Atlantic. The waves moved slowly now, their crests catching the last hints of light, silver edged and mesmerizing. The destroyer Calder slid through the water with quiet purpose, engines low and steady, a single streak of life cutting through the ocean's vast stillness. Out here, calm was both a blessing and a warning, a reminder that the sea could shift in an instant. Hargreaves leaned against the railing, feeling the subtle sway of the ship beneath him. The air was cool, filled with the scent of salt and the faint tang of metal. The storm had passed long ago, and the night had brought a deceptive serenity. Even so, the crew remained alert, every man attuned to the soft creak of the hull, the hum of engines, the faint whispers of waves against steel. Calm was never complete, not on this ocean, and the destroyer's crew knew it. On the bridge, Captain Thornton moved slowly, checking the instruments with meticulous care. The glimmer from the horizon earlier had vanished, leaving only darkness and uncertainty. He did not speak. There was no need. Observation required patience and silence. Around him, the bridge crew mirrored his focus, their movements precise, deliberate, almost hypnotic in their repetition. Every check, every adjustment was part of a rhythm as old as the sea itself. Below decks, the men moved quietly through the evening routines. Some wrote letters by dim lamplight, folding them carefully before placing them in sealed envelopes. Others cleaned, secured gear, or simply stared into the low-lit mess deck, eyes tracing the slow, steady rocking of the ship. The hum of conversation was minimal, subdued, almost ritualistic. Each movement, each breath was attuned to the ship's gentle sway and the quiet pulse of the Atlantic around them. Hargreaves felt the subtle tension of the night settle into his shoulders. It was different from fear, softer, quieter, a long reaching awareness that anything could shift the calm into motion. Somewhere in the deep, the U boat might move. Somewhere beyond the horizon, other ships might signal, or another glimmer might appear. And yet, there was beauty in the stillness, in the shared knowledge that the destroyer, the crew, and the ocean were entwined in the same slow rhythm. The sonar operator kept listening, faint echoes appearing and disappearing, like whispers from the deep. The pings were steady, hypnotic, a lullaby of vigilance. Even as he worked, fatigue tugged at his eyes, yet he remained alert, knowing that the balance between safety and danger was measured in these small, quiet pulses of sound. Stars began to scatter more widely above. Distant points of light mirrored faintly in the rolling water. Hargreaves traced them with his eyes, letting the endless night and steady motion calm him. There was solace in the repetition, the rise and fall of the waves, the hum of engines, the occasional faint echo from the deep. It was a rhythm that spoke of endurance, of patience, of the quiet certainty of being alive, however fragile that life might be. As the night deepened, the Calder sailed on, cutting through the darkened ocean with steady grace. The crew remained alert but calm, immersed in the hypnotic balance between watchfulness and quiet. In the gentle sway of the ship, in the soft whisper of the waves, there was a profound sense of connection to each other, to the ship, to the sea itself. And in that moment, the Atlantic felt endless, alive, and for now, strangely kind. The night receded slowly, as if reluctant to give way. The first pale threads of dawn crept along the horizon, silver and rose bleeding into the endless expanse of ocean. The waves caught the light gently, sparkling faintly, and the Calder moved steadily through the calm waters, her engines a quiet, constant hum. There was a gentle anticipation in the air, subtle and pervasive, as though the ocean itself held its breath for the day to begin. Hargreaves leaned on the railing, eyes tracing the horizon where darkness met the first light. The Atlantic stretched infinitely before him, quiet but alive, each ripple a whisper of movement from beneath the surface. The air smelled of salt and the faint lingering scent of rain from the storm that had passed days ago. Above, the sky shifted slowly, color seeping across the clouds, and the soft hum of the engines mingled with the gentle lap of water against the hull. On the bridge, Captain Thornton observed the horizon with steady calm. The first light revealed faint shadows on the distant waves, perhaps the silhouettes of convoy ships, perhaps only tricks of the shifting water. The sonar operator adjusted the gain, listening intently as faint echoes drifted up from the depths. Each ping carried potential, a hint of danger, a whisper of life, or simply the pulse of the ocean itself. Patience was essential. Hasty action could turn clarity into confusion, and the sea did not forgive mistakes. Below decks, the crew moved quietly, aware of the approaching day, yet savoring the lingering calm. Some sipped lukewarm coffee from tin mugs, others stretched, letting the motion of the ship wake tired muscles. Every sound seemed amplified in the soft dawn, the clink of metal, the shuffle of boots, the creak of hull against water, yet none was intrusive. Each echoed within the rhythm of the destroyer, part of the living motion of steel and tide. Hargreaves felt the subtle shift in the wind as the sun climbed slightly, carrying hints of warmth and a change in the air. The ocean mirrored the sky's transformation, waves catching the early light like molten silver. Somewhere beneath, the U-boat might move again, a silent shadow in the deep. Above, the destroyer pressed forward, engines steady, sonar pinging, the crew alert, yet calm. Every man aboard was immersed in the balance between awareness and stillness, between the calm and the inevitable stirrings of the day. The first distant cries of seabirds echoed faintly over the water, fragile notes against the hum of the engines. Hargreaves traced them with his eyes, watching the faint flashes of movement along the horizon. The ocean was both vast and intimate, alive in its gentle shifts, and the destroyer moved through it with steady precision. Each man aboard carried his own thoughts: home, duty, the long hours yet to come. Yet all were tied to the ship, to the rhythm of the waves, to the subtle pulse of the sea. As the sun rose further, painting the sky in soft gold and pink, the Calder continued on course. Shadows shortened, light deepened, and the ocean revealed new details with careful restraint. A distant wake, a shifting swell, the glint of water against steel. Hargreaves exhaled slowly, feeling a quiet certainty settle over him. Another day had begun. The hunt continued, and the Atlantic stretched endlessly around them, alive, patient, and eternal. The morning sun had risen fully, casting a pale golden light across the Atlantic, and yet the calm of dawn was deceptive. The ocean's surface glittered gently, each wave reflecting the light in quiet motion. But beneath, the currents shifted with unseen power. The destroyer, Calder, moved steadily, engines humming, cutting a smooth path through the water, but every man aboard remained alert, aware that the sea held secrets the eye could not perceive. Hargreaves leaned on the railing, scanning the horizon with careful eyes. The distant convoy glimmered faintly in the morning light, ships small against the vastness of the ocean. All seemed calm, serene even, yet experience had taught him that danger often hid behind quiet surfaces. Every ripple, every faint shadow could conceal an unseen threat. The Atlantic had patience, and patience often became peril. Below decks, the sonar operator focused intently on the headphones. The soft, rhythmic pings that had been constant all night now carried subtle irregularities, fleeting echoes that might have been a shoal of fish, or might have been something far more dangerous. He leaned forward, adjusting the gain, eyes narrowing as he tried to differentiate between the natural rhythm of the ocean and the deliberate movement of a submerged vessel. The pulse beneath the waves was faint, but unmistakable. Captain Thornton observed the readings silently, fingers resting lightly on the railing. He had learned that the ocean communicated in subtleties, and that patience, not haste, often kept men alive. Orders were given in quiet, precise tones. Maintain course, continue sonar sweep, prepare depth charges, but hold position. Every man aboard moved with a practiced calm, their actions deliberate, synchronized with the steady heartbeat of the destroyer and the restless pulse of the sea beneath. Hargreaves could feel the tension coil softly through the crew. There were no alarms, no rushing steps, only the awareness of potential danger, waiting unseen. He walked slowly along the deck, coat collar high against the wind, eyes tracing every subtle movement in the waves. The surface betrayed nothing, yet the ocean whispered in ways only careful observation could detect. Each swell, each shadow, each glint of water against steel was information, a silent signal to those attuned. Minutes passed in this careful observation. The destroyer moved smoothly, engines low, the waves carrying her in a gentle, steady rhythm. The sunlight shimmered across the undulating surface, and yet the potential for danger persisted in the depths below. Hargreaves leaned lightly against the railing, breathing in the salty air, letting the motion of the ship steady him, while the unseen threat moved quietly beneath. Above, the horizon remained calm, a mirror of sky and water. But the crew knew better. Subtle shifts in sonar readings, a faint vibration in the hull, a shadow that moved against the flow of waves. These were the signs that kept them vigilant. The destroyer pressed on, engines humming, the men alert, yet calm, moving in harmony with the rhythm of the ocean and the slow, measured heartbeat of the hunt. As the morning deepened into day, The Calder sailed on, each crew member conscious of the hidden threat that might emerge at any moment. The Atlantic remained vast, patient, and full of secrets, and through it all, the destroyer and her men maintained their quiet vigilance, alive in the rhythm of the waves, attentive to the subtle pulse of danger lurking just beneath the surface. The afternoon sun hung low over the Atlantic, soft and golden, turning the waves to molten light that danced across the surface. The destroyer, Calder, moved steadily through the calm waters, engines humming a gentle, constant rhythm beneath the hull. The ocean was still, a quiet companion that stretched endlessly in every direction, and for the first time in hours, the crew felt the subtle release of tension, a brief reprieve from the vigilance demanded by the deep. Hargreaves leaned against the railing, coat loosened slightly, letting the breeze cool his damp skin. The scent of salt carried softly on the wind, mingling with the faint tang of oil and steel from the engines. Around him, the waves rolled in gentle, predictable patterns, the motion of the destroyer familiar and reassuring. He closed his eyes for a heartbeat, letting the steady rocking of the ship and the hum of engines calm his thoughts. Below decks, the crew moved quietly through small tasks and moments of rest. Some wrote letters, the soft scratch of pen on paper, a meditation, a connection to home, to life beyond the ocean. Others cleaned equipment, each movement deliberate, rhythmic, almost hypnotic in its repetition. Even the youngest sailors, recently pressed into the demanding rhythm of sea life, moved with a sense of calm precision, the brief respite giving them a rare moment of ease. Captain Thornton stood on the bridge, observing the horizon with a relaxed focus. The ocean offered no immediate threat, and the faint glimmer of distant convoy ships was reassuring. He did not speak, but the calm presence of the captain itself seemed to set the rhythm for the crew. Silence was not emptiness. It was a shared understanding, a quiet acknowledgement that the sea could hold them safe for a while, even as danger lingered beneath. Hargreaves walked the length of the deck slowly, feeling the gentle sway of the ship beneath him. Each wave lifted and fell with soothing consistency, and the destroyer responded like a living thing, rolling and settling in perfect harmony. The sea was a mirror of patience, a companion that allowed brief moments of reflection before the inevitable return of tension and vigilance. The sun began to dip slightly, soft shadows stretching across the waves, yet the warm light continued to shimmer on the water. Hargreaves felt the subtle relief of quiet, the lull between alerts, the gentle promise that, for now, they were allowed to exist in calm, unthreatened by the hidden dangers beneath the waves. Even the sonar operator could afford to relax slightly, leaning back in his chair and listening to the faint, steady pulse of the ship and the ocean, unbroken by sudden, irregular echoes. Moments passed slowly, each one measured and deliberate. The hum of engines, the soft creak of the hull, the whisper of water along the steel, all combined into a gentle rhythm that filled the crew's senses. It was a reminder of their place in the vast Atlantic, small yet significant, alive in the motion of the ship and the pulse of the waves. As the light softened further, turning the horizon to shades of rose and silver, the crew of the Calder allowed themselves to relax, breathing in the calm, the warmth, and the subtle reassurance of motion and sound. The Atlantic stretched endlessly, alive and patient, and for a brief moment, the destroyer and her crew existed in perfect harmony with the ocean, steady, vigilant in their hearts, yet soothed by the gentle embrace of the sea. The ocean had shifted again, subtle but undeniable. The afternoon calm began to take on a restless quality, waves rolling with a faintly erratic rhythm, sunlight glinting sharply off their crests. The destroyer Calder moved steadily through the water, engines a low, constant hum beneath the hull. But every man aboard felt the shift in the air, a quiet reminder that beneath the surface, the Atlantic was never truly still. Hargreaves stood at the railing, eyes narrowing against the soft glare of the sun, scanning the faint horizon. Everything appeared ordinary, serene even, yet his instincts whispered otherwise. The sea always carried secrets, and experience had taught him that small deviations, the way a wave fell, the subtle change in a ship's pitch, the faint glimmer on the surface, could be the harbinger of danger. He tightened his grip on the railing, the hum of the destroyer beneath him, both comforting and alerting, a steady reminder of the life moving around him. Below decks, the sonar operator's hands moved deftly over the controls, eyes fixed on the faint pulses appearing intermittently on the screen. They were subtle, irregular, almost teasing in their movement, but unmistakable. Something moved beneath the waves, slow and deliberate, aware, patient. He leaned closer, listening intently, every ping a thread in a conversation he could barely understand, but knew to respect. Captain Thornton observed silently, binoculars lowered slightly as he processed the data with measured calm. His voice, when it came, was steady but clipped. Maintain course. Prepare depth charges. Keep all stations alert. The bridge hummed with controlled motion. No panic, only precision. Every movement deliberate. A choreography practiced over countless hours at sea. Hargreaves moved along the deck slowly, coat collar high against the wind, eyes tracking subtle reflections in the water. The Atlantic was a master of disguise. It could hide movement in plain sight, mask danger in glimmering waves. He felt the familiar tightening of anticipation coil softly through the crew. There was no need for alarm yet. This was observation, preparation, awareness. The unseen threat could vanish as easily as it appeared, or it could emerge suddenly, testing the skill, patience, and nerve of every man aboard. Minutes stretched in quiet tension. The destroyer moved with deliberate calm, sonar pinging steadily, engines vibrating softly through steel and water. Each sound, each echo, each ripple became a piece of a larger puzzle, subtle signals in the ocean's vast, living expanse. Hargreaves closed his eyes briefly, letting the gentle sway of the ship calm his pulse while his mind traced every possible movement beneath the waves. Above, the sky began to shift as the sun lowered, painting faint shadows across the rolling swells. Each shadow seemed to hold potential, the promise of discovery or danger. Hargreaves felt the subtle thrill of vigilance, the quiet rhythm of the hunt syncing with the heartbeat of the ship. Every man aboard existed in a balance between awareness and patience, anticipation and calm, the ocean's pulse wrapping them in a hypnotic, dangerous embrace. As the day waned and the horizon deepened to shades of dusky blue, the Calder sailed on, alert and deliberate. The shadows beneath the waves remained, faint but persistent, and the destroyer and her crew continued their watchful journey through the Atlantic, aware that the unseen threat might reveal itself at any moment. Every motion, every sound, every pulse of sonar carried meaning, and the ocean, patient, vast, and indifferent, held its secrets close, waiting to see how the hunters would respond. The Atlantic stretched endlessly, dark waves rolling beneath the fading light of the evening sky. The destroyer, Calder, moved steadily through the gentle swells, engines vibrating softly beneath the hull, a steady heartbeat in the vast, living expanse of water. The day had carried tension, observation, and subtle encounters with the unseen, and now the evening brought a quieter rhythm, a pause to reflect on the immensity surrounding them. Hargreaves leaned against the railing, coat collar high, eyes tracing the horizon where sky and sea blurred into infinite shadow. The ocean seemed calmer now, its restless energy softened by twilight. Each wave rose and fell in deliberate succession, a lullaby of motion that carried the crew's thoughts into reflection. Above, the first stars began to punctuate the deepening sky, tiny points of light mirrored in the dark water below. Captain Thornton stood on the bridge, silent, observing the horizon with a quiet, assured presence. The sonar readings were steady. No immediate threats emerged, and the distant glimmers of the convoy lay faint on the horizon. He did not speak aloud. The rhythm of the ship, the motion of the sea, and the awareness of the crew were enough. The Atlantic had taught them patience, vigilance, and a subtle appreciation for calm amidst uncertainty. Below decks, the men moved quietly through their evening routines. Some wrote letters, others checked gear, or simply leaned back in a rare moment of ease. The destroyer hummed through the water, carrying them with steady precision, each creak, each vibration, a reminder of the connection between ship, crew, and ocean. Even the youngest sailors, once nervous in the vastness, now found a rhythm in the quiet repetition, a meditative sense of being alive in motion. Hargreaves exhaled slowly, feeling the gentle sway of the ship beneath his feet. The Atlantic was patient, immense, alive, and yet oddly reassuring. The unseen threats below the waves, the shadows that had hinted at danger, now seemed distant, part of a past rhythm rather than a present concern. The ocean's pulse remained steady, a gentle companion guiding them through endless horizons. The sun dipped lower, casting long, soft reflections across the water. Hargreaves traced the light, letting the gentle rocking of the ship and the hum of the engines calm his thoughts. Around him, the crew moved with quiet efficiency, attuned to the subtle motions of the Calder and the rhythm of the waves. The sea had been patient, demanding respect, vigilance, and patience, and now it offered a moment of quiet reflection, a chance to rest in the continuity of its motion. Above, the stars multiplied, and the night became a blanket of infinite darkness and faint shimmer. Hargreaves closed his eyes briefly, letting the rhythm of the ship and the soft, hypnotic pulse of the ocean lull him into quiet thought. The Atlantic stretched endlessly, holding its secrets beneath, and yet it had carried the Calder and her crew through day, tension, and reflection alike. As the destroyer sailed onward, the crew felt a subtle sense of completion, a rhythm restored, the lessons of the sea acknowledged, and the quiet understanding that life continued, measured in motion, vigilance, and the hypnotic pulse of the ocean. The Atlantic was vast, patient, and eternal, and in its embrace, the Calder and her crew moved forward, alive, aware, and gently rocked into the quiet promise of another day. The ocean's edge had returned them to calm, for now the sea and ship the crew and horizon existed in harmony, a final gentle note to the long, immersive rhythm of life aboard the Calder.